guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I am here to talk about all the books that I read in January 2023. So I definitely had a really great reading month at the start of the year, such a really nice way to kick off my reading year as well. I managed to read 12 books during January, which is amazing, and yeah, I'm really happy with all the books I read. I had some really great reads within this mix as well that I am going to talk about now, and yeah, I'm just going to get straight on into it. So the first book that I picked up was a fantasy book, a kind of an urban fantasy style book, and that is Jade City by Fonda. This is a really interesting kind of in-depth, dense enough fantasy book where we are following a particular family who live in this city where there is something called jade, and jade is like kind of like a type of stone that is mined, and when people wear jade, a particular type of people wear jade, it can kind of give them extra kind of abilities in terms of, say, their how they see things, how they smell things, how they hear things. Everything is enhanced, and it also gives them really great kind of physical abilities such as fighting and things like that. And this city is very much run by the Mafia. There is a kind of a government body, there is a monarchy, but in terms of who actually seems to lay down the laws and who is actually in charge and who people respect, it definitely seems to be the Mafia that we are following in this book. So we are following a family called the Call family, and we are following just a few different people, a couple of brothers and a sister in this family, as well as a cousin. We are just seeing how kind of things around the power in the family are changing a little bit. There are some kind of tensions building up. There's also some outside threats that are coming in as well that could really threaten their rule. And this book is just, I really enjoyed it. I thought the build up of the tension in it was really great. There are amazing action scenes that like involve fighting. This is one of those books as well that kind of keeps you on your toes a little bit and keeps surprising you in terms of the mortal danger that your characters are in at all times, particularly even like leading characters and characters who were obviously firm favorites as well. They're always in danger. This is like kind of a book series that anyone could die at any time, or anyone could be, you know, stabbed in the back at any time. So you're really kind of on edge to see if any of your characters, if your favorite characters will make it through to the end. And I really just enjoyed the entire journey. So yeah, I gave this one a really strong like 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I'm really glad I read it. I'm really glad I picked it for my first book of the year. And I also just today have actually picked up Jade War, which is the second book in the series. So yeah, I'm going to be continuing on with this trilogy. It's kind of one of those ones that I wanted to continue as soon as I possibly could, so everything is still kind of fresh in my head and I don't really lose any of my knowledge about the world. So yeah, I'll be picking this up pretty soon, probably at some point in February, hopefully. Next book I read was unfortunately a little bit of a disappointment, and that was A Million to One by Adiba Jaigardar. I've really enjoyed Adiba's past books that she's read, The Henna Wars and Hanny and Issues Guide to Fake Dating, and this one is a little bit different to her usual YA reads. We're still following kind of a sapphic love story and female friendships, but this one is actually a historical fiction. We are back in Ireland in 1912, and we are following these 4 girls who all are staying in this boarding house, and a few of them are friends and a few of them are kind of more just acquaintances. But then the one girl who is a little bit of a kind of a artful dodger type of character, she's really good at pickpocketing and coming up with these kind of schemes. She has kind of come up with this heist to rob this kind of particular like really famous book that is going to be on the Titanic, and she ends up getting a hold of 4 tickets for the Titanic, and these 4 girls are all kind of working together on this heist to be able to take this book and kind of make a copy of it so that they can sell it. So we are following these 4 girls on the Titanic, but obviously we as readers know what happened to the Titanic, so the whole book as well, you're kind of waiting for that to happen. And yeah, so I had a really high hopes for this because I just thought like a Titanic sapphic love story, YA love story on the Titanic has to be like really fun, and there were elements of it that were nice. I always enjoy kind of like the diversity that Adiba has in her books, as well as and like even back then as well, like we're kind of starting off in Ireland and having characters of colour in Ireland back in like the 1900s. Like there wouldn't be loads of people of colour, but there definitely were, and I feel like that is often like left out of history. And the female friendship strands were really nice as well in this book, and but I just do think that this there was just a lot missing, and there was just a lot that I feel like could have been done and just wasn't. I felt like the heist storyline was pretty poor. I just found it not very believable. I didn't believe they were able to pull off this heist. It didn't feel very tight. And when I've read really great heist books in the past, now they have been adult heist books, or like kind of on the older end of YA, things like even like Six of Crows or The Lies of Loch Lamora, where you have these really clever heist stories. Anything that, like, you know, other ones just don't feel as good as that, and this one definitely, like, I definitely felt like there were so many holes in their plan, it was never going to work. And then I felt like there was so much more that could have been done with the fact that they were on the Titanic. I feel like if you didn't know that this was even on a, like, it could have been on any boat, it didn't feel like they were on the Titanic. There was just a lot in it that I just felt was missing. I felt the setting was really lackluster, and yeah, I just felt really disappointed by that Titanic setting. I didn't feel like it shone through the way it should have been. If you're going to write a book that's set on the Titanic, it needs to be like a really strong setting, and yeah, it just wasn't. So yeah, I just felt really disappointed in this one. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, and yeah, I wouldn't say it's a bad book by any means, and I feel like a lot of people would get so much out of this book, but just for things that I was really hoping for, yeah, they just disappointed me in this one. After that, I listened to an audiobook, and it was The Intoxicating Mr Lavelle by Nell Blackmore, and this is kind of a Regency style book. It's again historical fiction, and we are following two brothers who decide to go on their grand tour of Europe. And these two brothers, we find out very quickly, have led quite a sheltered life in London. They have been brought up by their mother and father, and their mother was kind of like this erudite character where she was really interested in everything to do with knowledge and everything to do with what makes a fine gentleman or a fine lady and what they should know. She was very knowledgeable in writers and poets and things like that, and language, and she taught her boys the same, and she would have had a very strong opinion about what they should know and how they should act as gentlemen. But they've had very little, I guess, dealings with the real world, and they've kind of find out pretty quickly, or at least the character that we're following, he finds out pretty quickly that him and his brother are kind of a little bit of a laughing stock when it comes to other gentlemen and ladies that they are meeting, because they actually kind of come from more merchant stock, so they're not really aristocratic enough for people to really respect them. And he's kind of struggling with this. And then he meets a character called Mr Lavelle, who he's completely enamored by the first time he meets, and kind of what happens there is a little bit of a friendship and a love story and a tragedy all in one. And we kind of see how the introduction of Mr Lavelle into these brothers' relationship kind of destroys everything in a way. So this one I didn't really like, and yet I would still read more from the author, and I'll try and explain. So I kind of liked the grand tour of Europe vibes in this. There was kind of a little bit of debauchery, a little bit of adventure, that I kind of liked. I actually really liked the feel of this novel, which was very campy, like Regency campiness of the novel, and I really liked that. And I kind of liked I liked that vibe that novel was going for. The thing I didn't like about this book at all was the characters, and particularly Mr Lavelle. He is not a nice character. He is he's very vulgar at times. We do find out that he has trauma in his past, which is why he acts the way he does, but he still treats other people quite poorly. And I feel like the way he treated the main character, and in particular the main character's brother, who is kind of the most important person in his life, the way he treats the brother, he kind of laughs at him, he mocks him, he starts fights with him, and then he purposely kind of pushes the main character and his brother apart, was just really upsetting, and I really didn't like to see it. And I thought the main character, his obsession with Mr Lavelle and the way he just couldn't seem to get over it, and even though he could see so many times the true character of Mr Lavelle, he still kind of went back to him again and again, and he basically let this man destroy his entire family. And I just really felt for his family in this. There's scenes at the very end with his parents that I really felt like I understood where the parents were coming from, and I was more on the parent side than anyone else's side. And yeah, this book was kind of like, it left me feeling kind of depressed and kind of sad. I just didn't like how this book made me feel, so I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. Yet I kind of liked the campiness of the writing, so in that case I will read Nell Blackmore's other book that came out I think last year. So I would read more from him and give him another chance, but this book in particular, it was just, 2 stars, wouldn't really recommend it, to be honest. And then the next book was another historical fiction. I read a lot of historical fiction by accident in January, but I'm not I'm not bad. I'm not sad about that. So I like historical fiction. So the next book I read was Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell Stevens. And this one is set in 1838 in Mallorca, and we are following the character of a ghost who is kind of haunting this monastery since she died like 400 years earlier. And she is a 14-year-old ghost who has her own tragic kind of backstory that we find out throughout the novel, and we see her as she kind of comes across the author George Sand and her lover Frederick Chopin. I'm not really sure how to say that. He's the famous pianist, and she comes across them, and she immediately becomes really enamored by George Sand in particular. And we just follow this story of George Sand's time in Mallorca, with her lover, and how they kind of tried to make something there, but like everything was against them, between the weather, the villagers, health wise. They just couldn't really make a life in Mallorca, and they eventually had to leave and go back to France. We kind of learn a lot about George Sand as an author, her as childhood, her early years as a wife, her eventual separation from her husband, and then when she eventually gets to Mallorca with her new lover, and her children. And we kind of learn all this through the eyes of this ghost and how she is able to kind of figure out things about people's past. And we also just find interesting things about the island and the villagers through the ghost as well. And the entire book is just like this. I just felt really fun. I just felt the ghost of Blanca, who is more or less like our narrator of the entire story. She had just kind of like a fun, like a fun tone to her story. Like, and at times she felt like a real teenager almost, I guess, in a way. This would be an adult book, but our narrator is a teenager. Like, she died very young, and because of that she still has kind of like a mischievousness about her, and I really, really like that. I don't really know anything about George Sand, I will say, so I don't know if people who maybe have read her books or know more of her would get more out of this than I did, but I still did really, really enjoy it for what it was, which was just this kind of story about this ghost deciding she really, really liked this family and wanted to stay with them forever if she could. And I just love learning more about Blanca's life and kind of, what it would be like to be a woman at the time that she was living in, a young girl who didn't know much about the world, and it was just really sad kind of what happened to her as well and what was allowed to happen to her. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars and would recommend. I just had a really good time reading it. Then I read a non-fiction book, and that was Sex and Sexuality in Medieval England, and this one was by Kathryn Warner, and this was fine. This was another 3 stars for me. It's kind of basically exactly what it says, like on the tin. It's about sex and sexuality in medieval England, but you're also kind of looking around like marriages, courting at the time, arranged marriages, birth, life expectancy. So we're looking at all of these things through the eyes of medieval England. So it's kind of like the 1000s up to the 1200s or 1300s up to kind of almost the Tudor era. So yeah, this was fine. I don't think I really got loads out of it, but it was interesting enough, and it was kind of just interesting in terms of the type of historical fiction I do like to read sometimes. So it was nice to kind of know kind of the basis of some of things around like relationships, sex, childbirth, all of these kind of things. So yeah, it was fine. 3 out of 5 stars. I read an audiobook that I really, really enjoyed, and that was Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera. This is one I've kind of had on my radar for a few years. Audrey over at Perpetual Pages has kind of raved about this book for ages, and they really, really love this book. So I always kind of knew about it, and I always kind of connected up to that booktube channel, and I always love anything Audrey kind of recommends, are a really great booktuber, so I'd really recommend you checking them out. But Juliet Takes a Breath, we are following a character called Juliet. She is in her late teens, I think. Like, she is kind of in her, just finished her first year of college, and she is starting an internship with her famous feminist writer. So she moves for the summer to Portland, Oregon, and she's kind of never really left New York in a way, and she's kind of coming into this whole new kind of environment through this internship. It's actually set in, I didn't realise until like a good bit through the book when they were talking about 9/11 at one point in the book, but this is actually set in 2003. But it kind of feels a little bit timeless. Like, I didn't realise it wasn't set. I kind of hadn't realised the absence of kind of social media in that sense, and like more modern phone behavior in the book until I actually realized it was set in 2003, and I was like, oh yeah, this kind of makes sense. But I just really enjoyed this one. We are just following Juliet on this amazing journey of self-discovery and really kind of figuring out who she is, and figuring out that she also doesn't really need to know exactly who she is yet, that she's on this like ever changing journey of self, of who she is. And we are seeing her at the very start of the book. She comes out to her parents as a lesbian, and it doesn't go that well, so she's kind of struggling with that throughout the rest of the book, to try and kind of come to terms with the fact that her mother is going to, it's going to take longer for her mother to accept her sexuality. And we see her kind of figure out that this writer that she really likes is this very much kind of like a white feminist writer, that like she is realizing that feminism is like, you know, the type of feminism that she's reading about isn't particularly intersectional, and she starts just learning a lot more about intersectional feminism for women who look and sound and have experiences like her, and how some other feminism out there isn't, you know, as accommodating as it should be. And she is just having this amazing, this amazing journey of finding out about the world, and just this young woman like learning about herself, about her sexuality, about her identity, about who she is as this Latina woman. And yeah, I just absolutely loved everything about this, and I would really recommend the audiobook because the author also narrates it, and I just think she just did an excellent job. And I just love this book. It was a 5 out of 5 stars for me, and I really enjoyed my time reading it. The next book I read, I actually have a vlog up for it, so I'm not going to say too much about it at all, and that was The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. This is the first book in the spin-off duology from the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black, and we are following a character called Wren who teams up with this prince called Oak to basically try and get his father back from this kind of evil queen who happens to be Wren's mother. And they are both fairies. They are in the land of fairy, and yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars in my vlog, and to be honest, I do think it's probably more of a 4 out of 5 stars really, and I did give that extra 5 just because I do love this world so much, but it's probably more of a 4 to a 4.5 out of 5 stars. But yeah, I still did enjoy it, and if you are a fan of the Cruel Prince trilogy, I would really recommend picking this up. After that, I read The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey. This is actually one I meant to read last year. It was on kind of like books I'm excited to read in 2022, and I didn't get around to it, so I kind of made it a priority to read it at some point in January, so I'm really glad I read it. This one is set on a Caribbean island in 1976, when these fishermen who are fishing off this island, they basically reel in this real live mermaid. And we are getting kind of different points of view with this mermaid. We are getting the fisherman's point of view, like these white fishermen who've come over from America and who are kind of like throwing money around, and they see this mermaid and they want to like take her, they want to you know, kill her and bring her home and try and like get loads of money off of her. And then we're also seeing this this man who lives in the island, and he's already had like kind of formed a relationship with this mermaid. He's seen her before in the sea, and he's trying to save her from these fishermen now. And then we're also getting kind of a point of view from the mermaid herself, and like who she is, what happened to her, how old she has been, this kind of like almost like ancient creature who used to be human, and we find out all these things that happened to her, and she has to kind of learn how to trust and how to maybe become human again. And then also she kind of knows that if she does kind of become human again, it won't last very long, and she might eventually have to die. We're getting a bunch of different voices in this story, and I just really enjoyed it. I always love a mermaid story. I was always a very big fan of Splash, starring Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks as a child, and I'm still a very big fan now. So I love anything to do with a mermaid, and I just loved this one. Very different from, like, you know, the white blonde perfect mermaid that you see in stories. This is a very different type of mermaid, and she's a lot more, I wouldn't say dangerous in a way, but there's a lot more like of the power of the sea. I feel is a lot more connected with her, and yeah, I just really enjoyed this one. I don't really have like that much to say about it except that I really enjoyed it. I have seen some reviews saying that they found maybe some of the way it's written in terms of the way people speak and the language, they found it a little bit hard. I personally didn't find it very hard to kind of read and get into the flow of the story. It's not a particularly long book as well, so I would, if you're interested in reading it, I would recommend it. I thought it was just, yeah, a nice a nice reading experience, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars and I enjoyed it. Another like really great book for me was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I read this as part of Lauren the Book's Patreon book club, and I'm really glad I picked this up because I had such a lovely time reading this, and I had a great time discussing it with everyone on the book club as well. So this one we are following two children at the start. We're following Sam and Sadie, who meet in this hospital ward. Sadie is visiting her sister who is sick, and Sam is a patient in the hospital. And the two of them bond over video games. I think it's like Mario, something to do with Super Mario at the time. And the two of them become really good friends. And then something happens where they kind of have a little bit of a fight and they don't talk for years, and then but they kind of live in the same area, so they're kind of always aware of each other. And then years later, when they are in college, Sam and Sadie, they end up reconnecting, and Sam asks Sadie if she will build a video game with him because he knows that she's really smart, she's really into video games, and it's also something he wants to do. So the two of them end up pairing up together one summer to build video games, and then this kind of sparks like the rest of their life in terms of their career. They build this video game that ends up getting a little bit of attention, and we kind of follow them throughout then as they kind of keep trying to come up with new games, but they're also going through things in their own lives, through like relationships, illness, grief and death and things like that, and we are following them through it all. We're following their relationship as it goes through these ups and then these really bad downs. There's a lot of fracturing in their relationship. Sometimes we don't know if they'll ever get back to where they were, and yeah, I just found this really great. I just felt really sucked into the story. It was kind of one of those books, I haven't had an experience of reading a book in a while where all I wanted to do was just curl up in bed and read this book and just like knock it out until I was finished it. I just felt like this is a book that was just perfect for a really cozy day where all you wanted to do was read, and this one just did it for me. When I was reading it, I never wanted to stop reading it, and yeah, I just love having that feeling with a book. It's a really special feeling, and it's one of the reasons why I love reading so much. I really love the video game elements in this, and I think anyone who is into gaming at all would absolutely love it. I'm not a huge gamer, but there are some games that I like, particularly games like The Sims and like Disney Dreamlight Valley, and there's games that they talk about in this that are very much inspired by similar type of games, and there are games that they were talking about this in this that I wished were like real games that I could play. It also made me appreciate video games more in terms of all the work that goes into them. Like, I never really thought much before about all the work that goes into every single bit of a video game, and I definitely think about it now, and I definitely just appreciate like everything working the way they work even more. There are some really moments in this that are very heartbreaking. They're very like emotionally like, you know, pulling at the heartstrings. And yeah, character Sam as well, from the time he was a child, he is suffering from an injury with his foot, and we do see him suffer with chronic pain throughout the book, and as well as mobility issues and a disability. So yeah, we see kind of that representation throughout the book. Now, I obviously can't speak if it is a true representation or not, but I really like appreciated it being there in the book, and it's really something that it really forms Sam's character in a way in terms of how he acts towards people and how he acts towards everything in his life, and his video games as well, and why he's into video games so much. His injury is, you know, really central to a lot of where he went in his life because it happened to him so young and he's been dealing with it for so long. It was almost a 5-star, and then the end of it, I don't know, there was just something at the end that I just didn't really like as much. And then I will say that Sadie is there is a very kind of frustrating theme in this book around communication, and they're not particularly good at communicating with each other all the time. But I will say Sadie in particular was so bad at communicating. She would just kind of get angry at something, and then she would never talk to Sam about it. She would literally just go for months and months without talking to him, just like completely ignoring him and treating him really badly, instead of just actually talking to him about what she was feeling and if it was something that they could, like, you know, work out together. And it was so annoying to read. So yeah, Sadie, I didn't like Sadie that much in this book, to be honest. I felt she was a very selfish character, to a point where she was using Sam as a doormat sometimes when he didn't deserve to be. And yeah, she was just really annoying, to be honest. So yeah, this was a 4.5 out of stars, but I really enjoyed it, and I would really recommend other people read it. The next book I read was Becky by Sarah May. This is a very interesting book that kind of starts off, I think it's 1989 it starts, and then it goes through the 90s and into the 2000s, and we're kind of, every section is kind of skipping forward a few years, and we are following a character called Rebecca. We see her as she starts this kind of nanny job with this family who we find out very quickly are, the father is the editor of this paper that she really wants to write for one day. So she's kind of looking at this as a great opportunity to try and get her writing skills noticed and to try and get like a foot in the door of this newspaper. And we kind of see her as she goes from strength to strength in her career. She eventually goes into the paper, and then she gets this really kind of big scoop in the paper. She becomes editor, or assistant editor, then editor, and then eventually CEO. And we see how all of this comes up, and then eventually there is kind of like a big scandal around her as well. This is a combination between apparently Vanity Fair, which I haven't read, to be honest, but from what I have seen about Vanity Fair, it's basically all the same kind of character names are in this, and then the relationships between the characters in Vanity Fair are very similar to all the relationships, like romantic and otherwise, in this book as well. But the other thing that this is about the real, like, it's definitely like 100% somehow inspired by the real story of Rebecca Brooks, who used to be who was the editor of the News of the World newspaper, which had a big hacking scandal a few years ago. So it definitely like it mirrors her career, like pretty much up until like the scandal itself, which is to do with hacking, phone hacking. And like a lot of the bigger stories and the cases that she is breaking are all very, very similar to Rebecca Brooks. So I was kind of reading it and I was like, am I like making this up? Do I feel like this is the connection, but I don't know if it's just my head, am I making it up? And then I kind of reminded myself, and I looked up Rebecca Brooks's career and like some of the points in her, like the big talking points in her career, and I was like, no, this is 100% 100% like a combination of Vanity Fair and then Rebecca Brooks's career. So yeah, an interesting kind of combination. I would actually love to read some interviews with Sarah May to see why she decided on like that combination and those inspirations behind her book. But it's really interesting. This one is just very entertaining. I will say it is a real reminder of that point in time in the 90s and early 2000s when tabloids ruled the world. Like there are like the royal scandals, like things around Princess Diana, kind of reminded me of, I feel like there is still a lot of power behind like things like the Daily Mail and stuff, but I think it was kind of before social media and before online news became like a really big source for people. Like this is before that. This is when like, yeah, people were still like buying physical papers all the time. And yeah, it's just really, really interesting. So yeah, I think if you are very interested in that at all, you would really, really enjoy this one. If you remember that time, if you remember any of those scandals, you would find this an interesting read. So yeah, this one is like a 3.5 out of 5 stars for me. I did enjoy it, and I will say, even though Becky isn't a particularly likable character, like she's not a particularly nice character. She's very like, she's in it to win it. She's in, like, she knows what she wants. She knows where she wants to go with her career, and because of that, she kind of sacrifices other relationships in her life. I did find her, I didn't hate her though. I still kind of liked her and I admired her for like what she did and for what she was doing for herself. I was like, like if that's what you want to do, you go and get it, even though it wasn't really the best way to go about things sometimes. But yeah, I found it quite entertaining and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then the second last book I'm going to talk about is The Story of Silence by Alex Myers. This one I also read on audiobook, and this one is I think it's some like retelling of a French story, but I'm not sure what the story is, to be honest. But it is a story that's kind of a urban fantasy kind of tale of like a medieval knight who, they are born, their name is Silence, but they were born a girl, but because of a decree by the king that girls would never be able to inherit, the child's father decided that if his child was going to be born a girl, it would be raised as a boy, and like no one would ever know, and then they'd be able to inherit the castle, and like things would go on, it would be fine. So Silence is raised as a boy, and believe, like, I'm going to use he him pronouns because those are the pronouns that are used throughout the book. So he's raised as a boy, and kind of when he's about 9 or 10, he's told like kind of like the truth about who he is and why he has to keep certain things a secret. And we see him decide that his big dream in life is to become a knight. So he goes off to try and do this, and we kind of just follow Silence on this like chivalrous like journey to become a knight through his training. He ends up traveling with minstrels for a while to kind of get away from his homeland, because he knows if his father and the people they'll never like allow him to actually become a knight, so he has to go off on his own to be able to achieve those dreams for himself through his own acts of courage and bravery and talent. So we're kind of following him through that, and then there is kind of this thread of storyline around like Merlin is in this book, and like dragons exist and things like that. And there's like this kind of small thread of magic because of Merlin in this book. But yeah, this was just like kind of like quite a nice story. It is a story that is very kind of, as I said, like Alex Myers, the author himself, I think is a trans man. So it's kind of an interesting look at like Silence kind of eventually coming to terms with their identity and who he is, and how he wants to identify, and kind of, you know, deciding like how he wants other people to see him as well, and if he wants to reveal the truth about himself. This is just like, again, another, like, I listened to an audiobook and it was fine in audio. I will say it kind of got a little bit long-winded in the middle, where it kind of felt like Silence's training as a knight was never going to end, and I was like, okay, like, when is he actually going to be able to like be a knight and like do things and really do something like the way he wants to be able to do? So yeah, it kind of got a little bit long-winded and I got a little bit bored kind of halfway through. And the ending kind of like, there was like some bits around the ending that I understood, like the messages that the author was sharing, and there was some nice kind of character building of Silence and like their like acceptance of themselves as well. So yeah. But yeah, it was fine. It was just a 3 out of 5 stars. It just didn't like, it wasn't amazing for me. I do really love the cover though. I really like the cover. And then the last book I read in January was The Luminaries by Susan Dennard. This is a YA fantasy book. We are following a character called Winnie Wednesday, who is part of the Wednesday clan, of this town where all the clans are named after a day of the week. So you have the Monday, the Tuesday, the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then depending on what day of the week it is, that's the day of the week that they go hunting in the forest that like surrounds the town. Where they go hunting these kind of like they call them these like demon creatures called nightmares, and they are hunting these nightmare creatures to protect them from the humans in the rest of the world, something like that. And Winnie, her family, something happened like 4 years ago in her family where her dad was declared a traitor, and because of that her family have been like, you know, they kind of been axed out of everything, and they're not allowed, like they're kind of ignored and shunned by the rest of the people in their town. And Winnie wants to go and do these hunter trials because she thinks that if she passes these trials and becomes a hunter, people will respect her family again. So she's kind of trying to do that. And we're kind of following her along as she goes into the forest and kind of actually meets some of these nightmare creatures for the first time and has to figure out how to survive against them with the kind of limited training that she's been able to do. Yeah, this one was another like fine book. I actually kind of enjoyed it. It had a little bit of like, I kind of enjoyed the YA aspect of it as well. To be honest, it gave me kind of like Riverdale vibes for some reason. And I kept imagining all the main characters as the Riverdale characters. I kept imagining like the main love interest as Archie, like KJ Apa, and Winnie I was kind of seeing a little bit of like a Betty type of character for some reason. So yeah, I was kind of like enjoying it for that sense. It was just kind of an enjoyable read. And then I will say, like, there were some really, really obvious things in this book. Like literally from the first, I think it was the first chapter, they were talking about something and I knew exactly, I was like, that's who it is. Like, that's definitely who it is. And then there was something else that they were trying to figure out of someone who could possibly be like another traitor. They call them like Dianas, so these kind of like witch type of characters, I think. And I definitely know who it is, even though it wasn't revealed in this book for some reason. I definitely know who it is. So yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to the next book to see where that all goes, because we didn't get the reveals I actually thought we were going to get in this book. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens in the next book and where that all, like, that the fallout of all of that happens. So yeah, this was enjoyable. I actually quite liked it. I'm hoping the story sticks with me more so than Susan Dennard's other book, which are the Witchland books, because for some reason, even though I enjoy the Witchland books, I just can't remember them. Like, as soon as I go into the next book, I literally have forgotten everything that happened in the previous book. So I'm really hoping the storyline of this sticks with me more for when I read the second book, but I'm thinking it will because it's a little bit simpler. So yeah, I'm looking forward to catching up with Winnie Wednesday hopefully next year when the next book comes out, so we'll see. So I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. So those are all the books I read in January, quite a few of them as you can see. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.